You are watching METANOJA TV. The guest of METANOJA television is Prof. Dr. Mila Aleckovic, psychologist. Dr. Mila, the first question refers to the current epidemiological situation in the country and the world.
Okay, thank you for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to explain something about the social engineering, about the black psychiatry, and about all psychological and psychopathological laws. Mila Aleckovic-Bataille, that's for my husband. Okay, I am a French professor now. I am in Belgrade in this moment. And so I would like to tell something about what is going on today in this COVID-19 operation. I am calling this situation COVID-19 operation social engineering and even black psychiatry. To understand what is going on today, we must talk a little bit about black psychiatry. Let's begin with by define. Let's define. Let's say first of all what does we mean by black psychiatry, and why I'm calling this situation today social engineering. Well, black psychiatry is all abuses of psychological and psychopathological laws in the purpose of unhuman experiments on human beings. This is very important to know. So this is in the mild form. We could talk about the psychological conditioning and the manipulation which lead to the degradation of humiliation of human beings. In short, black psychiatry includes sensory, physical, affective deprivation of people, subjects, affective physical torture of people, personality breakdown techniques, testing toxic substances on subjects, experiments on how far how far people can suffer physical pain or psychological humiliation, and so on and so on. It is very important to know that you can't really understand what is exactly black psychiatry if you don't know the laws of psychopathology and psychology, especially theory of learning. So now it is also important to say that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by United Nations in Paris in 1948, si ma mémoire est bonne, c'était le 10 décembre à Paris, states in Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or unhuman and cruel treatment or punishment. So, just to go briefly, social engineering, we'll talk a little bit later about social engineering, but black psychiatry is something which is not allowed by scientific ethics. And that's when we recite the Hippocratic Oath, we swear that never, never, never in our life we will do such a thing on humans. Unfortunately, some colleagues violate the Hippocratic Oath. We'll talk about this later also. But I would like to start this a little lecture about social engineering and black psychiatry. If you let me take a little walk through history, just to explain what was in ancient centuries. Black psychiatry is a new concept, but not the new practice. Well, how to say, the conditioning, the manipulation of human beings is very old practice, very, very old. And I would say that even ancient slavery became today a social engineering program. We can talk about the ancient slavery, but we will see now how it was. We'll go further, just to take this little walk through history, and to land after that to present, to explain what happened today. Well, already in the art of war of Sun Tzu, so that means before us, the great knowledge of social manipulation is described. The ancient China knew very, very much about the social manipulation, conditioning, and so on and so on. It was not the concept of black psychiatry, of course, but it was a practice of now. This is the art of war. System of knowledge in the art of war, something special. It is not the psychopathology nor science, psychological science, of course. After that, manipulative modeling of human personality, how to say, was well known by Spanish Inquisition, especially by Ignacio de Loyola, who developed pedagogy of Jesuits. He worked for the children, not against the children. But if you look these techniques on the other side, you can see, in fact, you can see personality breakdown techniques. So Spanish Inquisition applied personality breakdown techniques. Now we can move, and we'll go to the 18th century, 18th century, of course, in history, to show what was, in this moment, social engineering of what we call today black psychiatry. You must know that black psychiatry can be have two parts: physiological part and social part of black psychiatry. We'll talk about the both. So. Now we can mention Robert Malthus. The Malthusian theory of eliminating poor populations have been going on for decades in forms of, I don't know, bombings, enslaved populations, countries, tests with the pharmaco substances, experimental vaccines, just like today, not in the past, but today this is the same program, and so on and so on. It was the theory of eliminating poor populations. Robert Malthus. Now we'll see that what is going on today is it's kind of synthesis of the ancient social engineering and the Malthusian program. But let me continue in this way through the history. Now we can go to the 20s on the last century, and which is very, very important, is to talk about the Russian military physician Ivan Pavlov and his great discovery of the classic conditioned reflex. This is very important for all speech about social engineering. Well, the laws of classical conditioned reflex discovered by Ivan Pavlov on animals, of course, the laws affect humans and animals both. And this, in the lowest level of our unconscious or conscious part of personality, the conditioned, classic conditioned reflex is unfailable. But if you go to the level concerning frontal cortex, it doesn't work. That means that the human freedom is becoming more and more powerful if we are talking about the level involving frontal cortex and our consciousness. So it is very important to know. I talk about this because we must know that if you want to do the social engineering or physiological or psychological conditioning, you must do with unconscious part of the personality. If you're doing it with conscious, intelligent, strong personality, you can't do that. This conditioning, this manipulation doesn't work. So let us continue. Ivan Pavlov Ivan Pavlov was a genius Russian military physician, but it was on this scientific knowledge of Ivan Pavlov that much later the American mind control program relied. But just to not to forget something also very important, the experiments of Ivan Pavlov were shaped later into American behavior psychological school with very great scientific names as Skinner, Guthrie, Hull, Thorndike, Keller, etc., who did experiments on animals. They did experiments on animals. American behavioral psychological school is very important. This is a science. It's a very important science. They did experiments on animals. But just a little bit later, these experiments will continue on human beings. And now we can talk about, as early as in 1938, about another German physician, also military physician, named Otto Ranke, who did experiments for the first time, this kind of experiments, pharmacodrugs, toxic substances, and so on. For the first time, these experiments on human patients in the military academy in Berlin, before being perfected by another very famous physician, unfortunately very famous, named Joseph Mengele. Now we are talking about this in the continuation of the research of those great scientists. We will have experiments on human subjects and human beings, and this is already the beginning of the black psychiatry in this physiological sense, not social. About social sense of black psychiatry, we'll talk a little bit later, when I would like to explain what is happening today, what is going on today all over the world. But we have two very important things now we are in the 50s on the last century, and now we have two very important things. On one side of the Cold War, we have the American mind control program, which is not a conspiracy theory, it was a real practice. President Clinton apologized because of it. So American mind control did exist. Search, Bluebird, Monarch, etc. On one side of the Cold War, we have American mind control program, and on the other side, a little bit later, we have the Soviet psychiatry with the famous names Morozov, Luntz, Snezhnevsky, etc., who did also experiments on human beings, on subjects in hospitals, in the service of the worst repression. Because the concept of schizophrenia, invited by Snezhnevsky, was in the service of control, political control of all ideological dissidents of Soviet Union. So you have the same thing, the two phenomena. On one side, the American mind control program. Now we are still in the 50s on the last century, and 60s also. So you have American mind control program on one side, and on the other, Soviet psychiatry. Well, we'll try to repeat something which is very important for the continuation of this lecture. During the 50s on the last century, two scientists, Zarinsky and Kleitman, Eugene Zarinsky and Nathaniel Kleitman, did experiments with rapid eye movement sleep deprivation. And other experiments of sensory deprivation were conducted after that by two American psychiatrists, Donald Hebb and Donald Cameron. It is very important because we are just a little bit later, we will land to present situation. So Donald Cameron and Donald Hebb was independent researcher, and Donald Cameron was an associate of American Central Agency. But this is, they did the scientific experiments. These experiments were experiments on sensory deprivation on people. For us, it is crucial because we will see that what is going on today in the COVID-19 operation, we'll see the same sensory deprivation experiments on human beings, repressive and also humiliating experiments, but just a bit later. So Donald Hebb and Donald Cameron, it was on this scientific knowledge of those two psychiatrists that all the American mind control program relied. And we said that on one side of the Cold War we had this mind control program in the United States, and on the other Soviet psychiatry, which was in the service of the repression, of political and ideological repression of that time, Soviet Union. So we have the same thing, but a little bit different methods. Now, this on the, how to say, on the other side, that this is exactly what created 10 years later the great anti-psychiatric movement with the great names as Ronald Lang, Franco Basaglia and Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault avec son fameux livre Le Grand Renfermement. Le Grand Renfermement, we can say today it is just the lockdown, the Great Lockdown. Le Grand Renfermement, c'est Great Lockdown. You see this famous book of Michel Foucault is very actual today. So these names, Ronald Lang, Franco Basaglia and Michel Foucault, now, just because I'm talking about the French psychiatry, I can say some words in French. Ces grands noms, Ronald Lang, Michel Foucault et Basaglia, c'était les enfants des plus grands psychiatres français, Étienne Esquirol et Philippe Pinel, qui d'ailleurs étaient très connus. C'est eux qui ont instauré la psychiatrie au XVIIIe siècle en France et qui avaient libéré les malades des chaînes, qui ont donc commencé une nouvelle époque, qui croyaient en la guérison, parce qu'avant on ne croyait pas que les malades psychiatriques pouvaient être guéris. Donc c'est avec les deux grands psychiatres de la psychiatrie française XVIIIe siècle, c'est le début des écoles en psychiatrie, c'est Étienne Esquirol et Philippe Pinel, que les malades psychiatriques étaient libérés et que en fait le traitement et les psychothérapies commencent. Et d'ailleurs la psychiatrie en tant que science, enfin en tant que l'application de la science, parce que la psychopathologie c'est la science et la psychiatrie c'est une application de cette science. Bon, alors Michel Foucault, je dirais tout simplement, c'est l'enfant de ces grands psychiatres. Michel Foucault n'était pas un psychiatre, c'était un philosophe, mais c'est le fils spirituel et scientifique, on pourrait dire, des deux psychiatres, Esquirol et Pinel. Now, we'll just continue in English, just to finish this famous experiment in social psychiatry, social psychology and psychiatry. So, it was the reaction of all these experiments on human beings was the great anti-psychiatric movement. And now we are, we could understand what is going on today, because in the continuation of this research, the famous experiments conducted by Stanley Milgram, now we are in present now, in present time. So Stanley Milgram, Jerry Carlsberg and Solomon Asch did experiments to examine how much people are able to confirm and to learn, to listen, to confirm and to listen the cruel commands, the illogical commands of the request of authority, you know. So I'm talking about, when I talk about this COVID-19 operation, I'm talking always about the experiment of Stanley Milgram, because I think that what is going on today is a variant of Stanley Milgram experiment. It was experiment in social psychology, but also in black psychiatry. We'll see why. So Kasbeck, Milgram, and Solomon Asch examined how much people are able to listen to unhuman commands and why they listen to the cruelty, to the illogical commands, to the commands of past authorities. Do you want me to explain the Stanley Milgram experiment on you know about this? I think it's a very famous experiment in science, but if you want, I can just say a little bit about this. So Stanley Milgram asked people, subjects in experiments of social psychology, asked people to give the electric shock to other people and to increase progressively their strength. It was a request of authority. And they did this. Majority accepted to listen these commands and how to this kind of cruelty, even when subjects would start screaming. This is very important to know. They accepted to give the electroshock to the people, even when they would start screaming. And the classic experiment of Stanley Milgram is very important because the conclusion of this research is devastating. That means that a very few number of persons refuse to this kind of to listen these unhuman commands. A few number of subjects refuse obedience to the authorities' command in inhuman experiments. The majority accepted. The majority listened to this. The majority listened to illogicalities, to cruelty, to all of it was the request of authority. But now we'll see that what is happened today is the false authority. In this experiment of Stanley Milgram, it was a real authority. It was a scientific experiment. Of course, the subjects didn't know that experiment use actors. We'll see what happened today. Now, Milgram's experiment continued in different variants in science, and today, what we have today is the global enslavement practices combined all over the world, combined with the Malthusian theory of eliminating poor populations. And now we have something very strange and a new phenomena of social engineering today. Now, what is also crucial for us, we must ask ourselves today why this COVID-19 operation is a kind of Stanley Milgram experiment. What is a new form of psychological conditioning and manipulation today? What happened today? Well, as early as the beginning of March 2020, the fight against the new virus, okay, I never denied the existence of this virus, and I won't talk about the virus. I'm not talking about the virus, I'm not talking about the health. I'm talking about the freedom. I'm talking about the social engineering and black psychiatry. So, as early as the beginning of March 2020, all over the world, the pro-globalist authorities introduced a cruel, a brutal state of siege, l'état de siège, even the state of emergency and curfew, le couvre-feu, n'est-ce pas? Such illogical measures were not seen. I would say such illogical measures were not seen under the German occupation during the World War II. And now I'm talking what happened today, what is going on today. Grandchildren and young people were forbidden to visit their grandparents. Just remember what happened in March, in April, in June, in May, in July. All people were only allowed to leave their homes from 3 to 7 a.m. That means at night. What happened? What does it mean to leave your home at night? We'll see that it is a kind of experiments of sensory deprivation, just the experiments of Donald Cameron and Donald Hebb. That's why I'm talking about that. So the measures of isolation and sensory deprivation in the COVID-19 operation during the time of lockdown, as soon as completely illogical measures were introduced everywhere, all over the world, it was immediately clear that it was a matter of social conditioning, because people respect illogicalities only in generated fear. If you are not afraid, you don't respect illogicalities. Well, now we'll see what happened. No one asked why all people were only allowed to leave their homes at night. What does it mean? And nobody asked how people who don't have balconies would live. You remember what happened in that time of lockdown in March, April, May, June, July. A huge number of completely meaningless measures were introduced against really existing, I never deny the existence of the virus, really existing, but completely oversized virus. And now it was the experiment that was supposed to determine the extent to which people are afraid of orders from the authorities, but that now false authorities. In the experiment of Stanley Milgram, it was a real authority of scientific people. Now we had false authorities. Bill Gates, Fauci, I'm talking about those idiots. Now, okay, it was the experiment of social deprivation, and we can, to examine to what extent people can be enslaved, to what extent people can be afraid and enslaved, because they listen to all these meaningless measures only if they are afraid, only in generated fear. Now we can ask ourselves why, and this is the crucial question: why? Why happened all of this? Why this scenario of sensory deprivation in our century? What does it mean? What happens in lockdown situation? What happened? Why this virus is instrumentalized in this way? I would say that the answer is to cover in the classic diversion the real social and economic danger, the greatest danger, social danger today, and this is the collapse of banking system all over the world. Where if we go to the cause, we can talk about the collapse of banking system all over the world. And we can talk in this sense of Malthusian theory of eliminating poor populations. Now we understand what happened in COVID-19 operation, why this social engineering. Since the time of the financial collapse on the Wall Street, 2008, JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, the great capital to survive, all human, has abolished all human freedoms. And now we can say something about these measures, just to show that what happened in COVID-19 operation and lockdown situation, it was exactly what Donald Hebb and Donald Cameron did in their experiments. Well, we can talk about measures, COVID-19 measures, which cause mental confusion and shocks in population. We can talk about contradictory measures which amplify paranoid feelings in humans. We can talk about illogical commands and measures which promote illogical thinking. We can talk about repressive and humiliating measures. This is also very, very important to understand sensory deprivation. I'll be back to this point just a bit later. We can talk about brainwashing measures and a call to the population to distance themselves as much as possible. And finally, we can talk about techniques and materials which will cause victims. Well, I will explain briefly all of these situations to show that what happened in the COVID-19 operation was exactly physiological and also social black psychiatry. Well, measures which will cause mental confusion and shock. Although it was always known that walking, oxygen, and sun are generators of health and biological immunity. It's common sense. Psychological immunity also. Populations have been banned from exposure to light for more than 2 months. What does it mean? Now we can see also contradictory measures which amplify paranoid feelings in humans. We were, during this operation and during the lockdown situation, we were informed that the new virus was insignificant, only to be informed that just a bit later that the new virus was as dangerous as a medieval plague. We were informed also that a large number of patients died from the virus. You remember, although no autopsy was performed, and there was no evidence of this, because you can't know. If you don't do autopsies, you have any proof. Well, illogical. Let's talk about illogical commands and measures which promote illogical thinking. This is now the cognitive psychology in cause. For example, I'll give you one example. It was allowed during the lockdown situation. It was allowed to stand in line in front of shops, but it was forbidden to walk in the empty park and meet the people. What does it mean? It's completely nonsense, meaningless. But all these measures were the measures of sensory deprivation, repressive, humiliating measures, I would say sadistic measures, necrophiliac measures. We'll see why repressive and humiliating measures to covering mouth and nose for 24 hours a day, which causes, it causes acidosis in your body, maybe also brain damage or loss of memory. That's why I'm talking about a crime against humanity. It is a crime against our children. Crime against our children with all these measures with masks, mandatory masks. World Health Organization tell you that masks are mandatory today, and tomorrow they say that masks are unnecessary and harmful. It was what we call the SAH program. SAH program, this is a program of black psychiatry. And that means that one day you have one position, the other day another. Today I'm talking about white. I say today it's white, tomorrow it's black. Another day also white, and black, white, black, white, black. And all the time we are doing this. This is a SAH program. This is the program of black psychiatry applied in all prisons, for example, Guantanamo and also others. in all totalitarian systems. And we must know that all these phenomena were the program of social engineering and black psychiatry, not something which happened just like that. Ce n'était pas quelque chose qui arrivait par hasard, c'était un programme. Le programme de la schizophrénie dans ce qu'on appelle la psychiatrie noire, c'est un programme qui s'applique, c'est quelque chose qui est conçu, qui est programmé et qui est quelque chose qu'on fait dans tous les systèmes totalitaires, dans les prisons, pour rendre la personne complètement faible, pour prendre l'immunité, pour casser la personne. En fait, pour casser la personne. I would say this is a personality breakdown technique. You know, SAH program is a program of personality breakdown technique. And now, when we talk about sensory deprivation, the worst of all the measures was the ban on elderly people over the age of 65 to leave their homes except at night. It was really something very, very cruel. And I will say you something which I noted here. Conservative Deputy Sir Charles Walker says, lockdown is an extended exercise in almost studied and deliberate cruelty. Well, I agree with him. It was a deliberate cruelty. And now we can talk about the population who had a mechanism of defense mechanism, identification with aggressor. It's a very pathological mechanism. The people were afraid. The people were afraid. They were called to distance themselves as much as possible, as from their loved ones, from their children, etc. It was really something, the disaster. And now I would like to say just something about the profile of this program, the profile of those people, and the profile of this administration, of this supranational minority who did lockdown all over the world against their own population. Well, we can ask ourselves, what is exactly the profile of those people? When we are talking about a banking system, when we are talking about Bill Gates' psychiatry, he's somebody who is a person, mentally ill person. Okay, we'll talk about leaders all over the world. What happened with this supranational minority? What is their profile? This is very interesting to know, because they did something against their own populations, against their own peoples all over the world. It was the same experiment all over the world. Well, there is no doubt that we can talk about psychopathy. I think that this supranational minority, this administration, they are psychopaths. Well, if we must define what we mean by psychopathy, I can just tell that psychopath is somebody who is aggressive, who is dangerous, who is narcissistic, who never feels guilty or shameful, who doesn't care about the consequences of his actions. They didn't care about the consequences about their peoples. When we are talking about this supranational minority of COVID oligarchy, c'est la COVID oligarchie, n'est-ce pas, dans le monde entier. And psychopath is somebody who is psychopathy is a mental disease, is a mental disorder. But psychopathy is something who, this is a kind of synthesis of mental illness and interest in everything which is profitable. Because all these people, all these leaders all over the world, they got a lot of money to do lockdown. They got a lot of money. This is a question of money. And when we ask what is the real motivation of a psychopath, we can just say sex, money, power drive. That's all, as simple as that. Psychopathy, nothing else. They don't care about their peoples. They don't care about anybody. They never feel shameful and they never feel guilty. And I would say that this mentality of this minority, COVID oligarchy, I can maybe describe their mentality as, I would say that they are serial killers. They are serial killers, their own populations. It is very important to know, because they have no any feeling about the peoples to do this research. It's not a research, experiments on human beings, social deprivation, crime against children. This is exactly what American mind control program did on one side and Soviet psychiatry on the other. And that was exactly the program of COVID-19 operation and social engineering. That's why I'm talking about Stanley Milgram, Carlsberg, Solomon Asch, Donald Hebb, Donald Cameron, Otto Ranke, Joseph Mengele, because it's the same thing. Now, before we had the scientific experiments, today we have charlatans. And now I will just, my conclusion is that their experiment failed. This great experiment all over the world failed. Now we can ask ourselves, what was exactly the goal of this experiment? When we go to the cause, we understood that the cause was to cover, in the classic diversion, the real problem, and the real problem is the collapse of banking system all over the world. Okay. Now we understand what was the cause, but what was their goal in this COVID-19 operation? Their goal was to passivate populations in all the countries and all over the world, and to create Orwellian states with enslaved people. And we in psychology and psychopathology, we can say to create the Skinner cage of rats. The Skinner cage of rats. That was the experiment of Skinner, Guthrie, Hall, Thorndike, Keller. They did experiment on animals. The goal was to create one kind of cage of rats. We are all rats. We are slaves. But now we can talk about our freedom, and we can ask a famous question of Mark Twain: what is man? Are we really rats in Skinner cage, or we just must remain as human beings? Now I would like to tell something why I think that this experiment failed. First of all, the experiment of COVID-19 operation was conducted by charlatans. You know, they don't have a real scientist. A real scientist today are Nobel Prize Michael Levitt, Nobel Prize Luc Montagnier, le grand professeur et virusologue et épidémiologue Dr Didier Raoult, le professeur Christian Perron, le professeur Trotta, le professeur Jean Fourtillon, une scientifique généticienne qui s'appelle Henrion Code, etc., etc. Donc il y en a pas mal. Ce sont les vrais scientifiques. Eh bien, ce qui est très important de dire, c'est que tous ces vrais scientifiques, tous ces prix Nobel, tous ces vrais chercheurs en épidémiologie, en virusologie, en génétique, en biologie moléculaire, psychiatrie, psychologie, pourquoi pas comme My Community, ces gens-là ne voulaient pas travailler pour la Covid-oligarchie. Et ça, c'est très important, parce que c'est justement pour cette raison-là que le grand expériment Stanley Milgram Experiment a échoué. Parce que justement, quand je parle de la période nazie et de ce que Hitler avait comme scientifique, c'était les plus grands scientifiques de l'Allemagne de son temps, qui d'ailleurs étaient achetés pour falsifier l'histoire allemande. Mais c'était des scientifiques, c'était des grands noms. Et c'est pour cette raison-là que le nazisme a duré longtemps, parce que Hitler avait les vrais noms, les vrais scientifiques allemands, d'ailleurs achetés, corrompus, mais c'était des scientifiques. Qu'est-ce qui se passe aujourd'hui? Bill Gates, c'est un cas psychiatrique. Fauci, c'est un faucheton. Dr Christian Drosten en Allemagne, c'est un criminel. Neil Ferguson en Angleterre, c'est un criminel. Eh bien, eux, ils n'ont pas les vrais scientifiques. Luc Montagnier, prix Nobel. Didier Raoult. Michael Levitt, prix Nobel, et tous ces gens que je viens de citer ne voulaient pas travailler pour la Covid-oligarchie. Et c'est pour cette raison-là que leurs tests sur toutes les populations dans le monde entier et ce sadisme social, de l'ingénierie sociale qu'ils ont essayé de faire pour faire passer les vaccins et pour faire tous les expériments sur les humains, c'est pour cette raison-là que ça n'a pas eu de succès, que ça a échoué. Moi, je voudrais dire that is the reason because this great experiment all over the world failed. They didn't have scientists. Scientists are not with them. They have Fauci, they have Dr. Drosten, criminal, Neil Ferguson, criminal, and Bill Gates, idiot. They don't have a real scientist, and this experiment failed. And now I'm just happy to say this because this is also that the urge of life won. I think that the instinct of life is much stronger than the instinct of death. And that's why their experiment did have success. They just couldn't do this social engineering. They did something. But finally, we won. We the people, we won. We freedom people, we are now in our action and in our class lawsuit action all over the world called Crime Against Humanity, which is conducted by one famous German and American lawyer, Dr. Rainer Fulmich. And I'm in charge for the Eastern and South Europe, especially Serbia, but also we have here with us Macedonia, Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia, Montenegro. All this region will go together in this class action lawsuit. We'll go together, and that's why happened today. Their experiment failed. Our class lawsuit began. And now it is very important to know that we must say yes to this lawsuit, Crime Against Humanity. L'avocat allemand, qui est d'ailleurs un avocat allemand et américain, Dr. Rainer Fulmich, a commencé sa grande plainte, Crime Against Humanity, et il a des correspondants de tous les pays. Dans tous les pays. En France, nous avons un avocat qui est un brillant avocat qui s'appelle Maître Carlo Alberto Brussa, qui d'ailleurs est en train de poser, enfin de faire cette plainte avec l'avocat allemand et américain. Et nous sommes tous ensemble maintenant dans une action qui bientôt commencera et que nous appellerons Nuremberg 21. This is very important to say because we must give a message to all our friends all over the world to say yes to this class action lawsuit, Crime Against Humanity, because we must be human beings and not Skinner's rats. And this Crime Against Humanity class lawsuit will be the great phenomena and which we call Nuremberg 21. Now you know, when I'm talking about this question, what is man, this famous question of Mark Twain, the book of Mark Twain, what is man? I'm just just now some words comes to my mind, because when I was younger, I liked very much the poems of T.C. Eliot, and a book called Wasteland and Other Poems. And just now these words comes to my mind. We can ask ourselves, we can ask this question. And T.C. Eliot, let me say, because it is wonderful, T.C. Eliot said, where's the life we have lost in living? Where's the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we have lost in information? The cycles of heaven in 20 centuries brings us further from God and nearer to the dust. And that is the real question. Are we the dust? Are we rats or human beings? Et c'est pour cette raison-là que je voudrais terminer cette petite explication de ce que c'était la psychiatrie noire. Malheureusement, je suis psychologue et psychiatre, je sais très bien ce que c'est ça dans la psychopathologie. Je voudrais terminer avec beaucoup d'espoir que nous avons la force et que nous avons le courage de mener notre combat jusqu'au bout. Que nous sommes des hommes, des humains libres, courageux, forts, et que notre victoire sera certaine contre ces criminels, parce que ce sont les criminels de guerre. COVID-19 Operation, ce sont les criminels de guerre dans le monde entier qui ont martyrisé et torturé leur propre peuple partout dans le monde de la même façon. Les conséquences étaient peut-être pas les mêmes, mais c'était les mêmes méthodes. C'était les méthodes de Donald Cameron, Donald Hebb, Otto Ranke, Joseph Mengele. Je fais bien sûr la différence entre ceux qui étaient des assassins et ceux qui étaient des vrais scientifiques, mais les méthodes, c'était les mêmes méthodes. Et c'est quelque chose qui est reconnu comme la psychiatrie noire, la psychiatrie physiologique et aussi dans l'aspect social. La question de Michel Foucault et le livre de Michel Foucault qui est très très actuel aujourd'hui, Le Grand Renfermement. Parce que qu'est-ce que c'est que le grand renfermement? C'est This is a Great Lockdown. Donc, je voudrais terminer. Ça, c'est une matière très dure. Ça, c'est une matière très difficile à exposer. Pas intellectuellement, mais émotivement et affectivement. On sait ce qu'on fait dans la psychiatrie noire. C'est ce que nous n'avons pas le droit de le faire. Quand vous faites votre sermon d'Hippocrate, vous êtes obligé de donner la parole, que vous ne ferez jamais les choses comme ça, les expérimentations sur les hommes et sur les patients, sur les humains. Alors ça se fait quand même. Il y a des collègues qui trahissent et qui aident les corrompus, les politiciens, les mafieux, la big pharma, les criminels dans les banques, dans les cartels banquiers, et qui font ça aujourd'hui pour nous faire passer les vaccins qui ne sont pas des vaccins, qui sont des traitements génétiques et qui sont très très dangereux. Donc il faut savoir, moi j'ai pas parlé de virus en ce moment, je suis pas un virusologue, je suis pas un vaccinologue, j'ai pas parlé des virus, j'ai pas parlé des vaccins, j'ai parlé de mon domaine, de la psychiatrie noire et de la psychopathologie. Je suis sûre, 100%, que tout ce qui s'est passé dans l'épisode de lockdown et de ce qui d'ailleurs continue aujourd'hui dans certains pays avec le renfermement, avec le couvre-feu, avec tous ces idioties et avec tout ce sadisme social contre les gens, avec on leur donne pas le droit de travailler, c'est le droit fondamental de travailler. Tout ce qui se passe aujourd'hui dans ce sens-là, on a expliqué les causes, on a expliqué le but, on a très bien dit que c'était en fait le collapse of banking system all over the world, if we go to the cause, mais ça c'est quelque chose qui est vraiment une méthode des nazis. Ce sont des nazis, tous ces gens qui exécutent ce programme sur les pauvres gens et qui les maltraitent, alors qu'ils sachent très bien que les masques ne servent à rien, que les vaccins ne sont pas des vaccins, que c'est un mensonge, ce sont les traitements génétiques, c'est pas des vaccins. Donc on ment les peuples, ils le savent très bien, mais ils le font, pourquoi ils le font? Pour voir jusqu'à quel point on peut effrayer les gens, jusqu'à quel point on peut créer une ambiance de schizophrénie, de paranoïa, de la dénonciation commune, et si vous voulez, jusqu'à quel point les gens peuvent devenir les rats dans une cage de Skinner. Eh bien, c'est pour cette raison-là que j'ai fait l'analyse des recherches de Stanley Milgram, parce que je crois que c'est exactement la même chose qui se passait aujourd'hui, et toutes ces expérimentations avec la déprivation sensorielle, avec la privation sensorielle des gens, c'était quelque chose de monstrueux. C'était monstrueux de ne pas donner la possibilité à des vieux, à nos grands-parents de sortir de leur maison, de leur autoriser la sortie uniquement la nuit. C'est exactement ce qui se passait en Serbie avec ce type qui est au pouvoir. Qu'est-ce qu'il faisait en Serbie? C'était la torture. C'était la torture des camps de concentration nazis. Et là, maintenant, ça continue dans d'autres pays d'Europe. Et je dirais, je vais paraphraser quelque chose, je vais dire une phrase que Maître Alberto Carlo Brussa à Paris, notre avocat, a dit, parce que je suis tout à fait d'accord avec lui quand il a dit « Je préfère mourir dans la liberté, je préfère mourir libre qu'être guéri dans une dictature. » Bien sûr qu'on ne mourra pas, mais c'est pour dire que ce n'est pas une affaire de virus, ce n'est pas une affaire de santé, ce n'est pas une affaire de l'Organisation mondiale de santé qui a un jour dit une chose, l'autre jour une autre chose, c'est le programme de schizophrénie. C'est quelque chose qui était voulu, programmé, c'est quelque chose qui était prémédité contre les gens. Ils ne sont pas bêtes, ils faisaient ça pareil, ils faisaient exprès de dire noir, blanc, pour nous casser la personnalité, pour nous prendre le peu de l'immunité que nous avons eue. Eh bien, je dis comme Carlo Alberto Brussa, je préfère mourir en liberté qu'être guéri dans la dictature. Et ça, ce qu'ils ont fait, ça mérite d'être jugé dans un nouveau Nuremberg, et j'espère que ça sera le cas. C'est pour cette raison-là que je me suis engagée dans cette plainte commune avec le docteur Rainer Füllmich, et je représente, je vais représenter les plaintes de l'Europe du Sud-Est, de toute la région, pas seulement celle de la Serbie, mais toute la région. Moi, je suis par papier française, mais peu importe. Je suis maintenant, en ce moment, actuellement, dans mon pays d'origine, et je m'occuperai des plaintes tenues par les Serbes, Macédoniens, Monténégrins, Croates, Slovènes et tous ceux dans notre région. Et nous allons joindre Dr Füllmich dans cette grande guerre et dans cette grande bataille que nous avons l'obligation morale de gagner. Parce que si nous ne gagnons pas cette fois-ci, nous serons la dernière génération des gens et des hommes libres. Soit nous sommes des rats de Skinner, soit nous sommes des humains. Et je dirais à la fin, pour tous mes collègues psychiatres et psychologues dans le monde entier, j'étais la présidente du Congrès international de la psychopathologie de l'expression 2015. On avait 17 pays, j'ai beaucoup d'amis dans le monde qui ont de l'estime pour moi et moi j'ai de l'estime pour eux. Nous sommes une communauté de psychiatres et de psychologues qui se battent pour la liberté. Nous ne sommes pas dans la psychiatrie noire, nous sommes dans la psychiatrie blanche, nous sommes dans la psychiatrie de vie. Moi je suis anthropologue de santé, je me bats pour la vie, pour la liberté des gens, pas pour les épreuves des pharmacosubstances on the human patients. Non, je suis quelqu'un qui se bat pour la liberté, pour la psychothérapie et pour la santé et pour les méthodes humaines. Et je suis aussi l'enfant des psychiatres Esquirol et Pinel, et je suis l'enfant de l'antipsychiatrie aussi, et je suis l'enfant de Michel Foucault, et je suis tout à fait d'accord avec eux. Tout en étant psychologue et psychiatre, je défends la liberté. Et je crois que ma communauté dans le monde entier doit se lever et lever le ton et dénoncer ces tortures sur les gens. Et finalement, je voudrais appeler tous nos amis aux quatre coins du monde, évidemment, pour se joindre à ce combat, parce que nous devons vaincre. Et nous devrons rester les hommes libres, courageux et forts. Just to say something about either we gain our freedom or this COVID-19 operation, black psychiatry, Skinner cage of rats, experiments on human beings and so on, will win. So we have no choice. We must fight. We must fight for our freedom, and we must fight for our humanity. And this is my message to friends all over the world. When we were children, maybe you remember it was one song in the 60s. Okay, right. I'm not talking about the age. One song by I don't know. It was Cliff Richard or somebody who was famous in that time. And this song was named "Power to All Our Friends." And that's why I would like to finish this little message to our friends all over the world. We must fight for our freedom and for our humanity. And my final message is, join our class action lawsuit, crime against humanity. We will win. Power to all our friends all over the world. Je souhaite beaucoup de courage pour tous nos amis qui se battent aujourd'hui, pour tous ceux qui ont perdu leur travail, leur boulot, pour tous les enfants martyrisés avec les masques qui étaient non seulement pas nécessaires, mais nocifs. Je souhaite que tous ces gens-là se joignent à notre action, tous les parents qui voudraient libérer leurs enfants, et tous ceux les pauvres gens qui sont des victimes de cette opération COVID-19, pour se joindre à nous, parce que bientôt, nous allons regarder le plus grand et le plus intéressant reality program, and that will be Nuremberg 21. Okay, Nuremberg 21. We will win. Power to all our friends. Du courage, chers amis. Nous resterons les hommes libres, forts, combattants et vainqueurs. Merci.